John Welsman, this is the Community Economic Development Committee. Mandy?
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Trainee?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Constant? Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Chair, you have a point.
Thank you. So, our agenda today, I was thinking about moving it, but since, oh, here's Pete. Okay, Pete's here. Pete.
Morning. Morning, Pete.
So, Michelle Francis, are you here for the first topic?
Yes.
Yes.
And then I guess, okay, I was thinking we should switch the order, but Dean's not here, so we should go ahead and start on that. We'll go in order here. So, this is probably something that should have been done for a while. It says in the new Title 21 that there will be a user's guide, which we decided not to do, but it says user guide will talk about the community meeting. Okay. And we saw at the recent rezone, and every rezone we deal with, that people's expectations don't match what is real, and we need to get that in alignment. So, do you want to tell us your thoughts at this point, or who's leading this discussion?
I will be.
Okay.
I think both of us. So from my perspective, to speak to the Title 21 Users Guide, just going to get that off the table. We are going through an exercise of going through every section of code and removing that reference. Right now, we have about a 60-page ordinance because of how many times it's referenced. And so we are trying to be very thoughtful about, as we're doing this, we're going to be careful that we get it removed everywhere, and that we're, if we're removing it, there's something else in place. So it's taking longer than we expected, and we have some other ordinances that have come up.
Why are we removing references to user guide instead of creating a user guide?
Because we come to the reality that we're not going to create a user's guide. So instead what we've been doing is director's policy. So if you go to our website, we actually have a link that's on the users, is it called what, you use it, or? Self-help. Thank you. And that has director policy. So as these issues come up that need clarity, they're being provided. A lot of what was intended in the user's guide is actually already in the code. I mean, when we talk about what's going to be required, we'd rather have the information that we want to see provided by applicants on the applications, because that stuff can be updated as necessary, as you know, just as time changes. And then we also are working with Liver Play and other groups to help get kind of these policy paper, or not really policy papers, but handouts that explain things. Like for the ADUs, you'll be seeing something coming out very soon, where we're working on other tools that can actually provide specificity or guidance instead of putting it in a user's guide. Because the short answer is, it's not gonna, it's a lot of effort, and we don't have the resources, and it's not going to get done. And so in lieu of, we're just going to remove the reference.
Actually, I forgot, we did the quorum thing, but then we didn't go around the table for other people. So we did the quorum for assembly members, and Pete Peterson is here, but let's go around the table in the room, just so the recording knows who's who.
Michelle McNulty.
Francis McLaughlin, Planning.
Neil Bailey, Planning Zoning Commission.
Ryan Neal, Planning.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Richard Office, Economic Community Development. Jed.
Colleen and Luann, we are sign language interpreters.
Chris Usher, RC.
Jed Smith, Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office.
Mark Butler, Community Council Center.
Al Millsboy, FCC delegate, and UACC vice president.
Okay, and Danielle is the new chair of the Planning Commission, and Mark is Federation or Community Council Center manager, and Al, just for people to know, has gone to some community councils to help new community council chairs know how to run meetings and so on. So what is your job? What is your role?
Outreach for FCC.
Outreach? Okay.
Yeah, and vice president of UACC.
Okay, good, thanks. So the way we do this, if you have something to add, if someone informed, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Let you speak. All right, thanks. Sorry, Francis.
No comment. She covered everything.
Okay, so that's on the user's guide. So we were pulling out because we weren't really going to do it, but it doesn't mean those things aren't needed. So here we have a case where it said we do a user guide, we're going to pull it out.
Right.
But we still need to get some guidance so people know whether expected a rezone, a replat, and so on.
And so, and so I think what I'm hearing and what really came to light in one of our recent rezone cases is that there is an expectation from the community that certain information is going to be provided, and there's actually a certain expectation from the planning department of what we think is necessary. And so I agree with you, and so I think one thing that we can do to help on the public process end is to be clear that, because I think the steps that are needed for the public noticing, the going to the meeting, that's all very well laid out, but I think where we're running into issues is what is the information that should be presented. And so we can do a user's guide that for both the applicant and the community councils that very clearly says that in the case of a rezone, at a minimum, the applicant should discuss these points, because for everybody's sake, for a rezone, we only expect it. We don't want to see site plans with rezones. Rezones should be based on, do they implement the land use plan? Are they implementing the district plans? Because a zoning district has such a wide swath of uses that if we just look at the use specific, we're forgetting that there's maybe 10, 15, 20 other uses that are allowed in that district. So we need to be looking at it as, okay, if this site gets rezoned B3, are we comfortable, all the uses within that district appropriate for that site? Not, is that storage facility appropriate for that site? That has its own set of review that would come following. So, but I think that that's probably one of the biggest areas where applicants get sideways with community councils, because that's a hard concept. If someone's saying, hey, we want to change the land use or the designation, and because land use is a very technical term, and I think it's something that professionals have a better handle on. From a layperson's perspective, they just want to know, what are you going to build here? And so I think that that's really what we have to, that's the one we have to address, but in doing so, we can talk about all the other applications, and which are more similar. I think the rezone is kind of that special one. So that's how I see it moving
Right.
forward. It's just a handout that kind of says, these are the at a minimum what should be discussed.
So are you prepared to do that?
The planning department can do that. I don't know what the timing will be though.
Sorry. I was just gonna, to step back and take a more holistic view of what Michelle is describing. So the way that Title 21 is set up and outlines the various both boards and actions they take, as well as procedures that applicants take, it's a modular approach. And the topic that we're discussing is primarily dealt with in this omnibus section of common procedures that apply across different types of zoning actions. And you described some of those, plattings, et cetera. And in that section, it has a fairly broad description of what community meetings are required, the purpose, what types of actions require it, and what is expected from the applicant at the conclusion as it relates to submitting the written comments. And so I just wanted to read for the group and the audience the purpose statement from that section of code, since we don't have any handouts here. And it says, the community meeting is an informal opportunity for the developer to inform the surrounding area residents and property owners of the details of a proposed development and application, how the developer intends to meet the standards contained in the title, and to receive public comments and encourage dialogue at an early time in the review process. So it's broad, it is generally vague, but it also has some specific criteria or outcomes that applicants are expected to deliver.
And I think, just to add to that, I think that one of the things that probably gets confusing is that because it is so broad, it uses the word development, and I think that sends a message to someone that they're supposed to speak to a development and not looking at the rezone. We're actually kind of housing that under there for the purpose of this section, we wouldn't in any other. So
I would look at those carefully. Those individual words are tripping us up. So, Forrest?
Yeah, I wanted to highlight that and drill down on it a little bit more. I think Michelle, you've largely stated it, but again, I think we need to talk about changing that language, because what we're saying two contradictory things here. And I know what Michelle is saying. It's just a rezone, as John has said before. They don't need to have a site plan. They don't need to say what they're going to build. But in the real world, people ask for these because they have an idea about what they're going to build. In most cases, and the language that says detailed development, and that, that language is fundamentally at odds with the idea of a sort of blank slate rezone.
Just clarification, it doesn't say detailed development, it says details of development. I think
Details of the development.
each of the planning processes or entitlement processes that require community meetings are distinct and individual legal processes. So it uses terminology that we specifically associate with, say, site plan review or master plan, something where you will see that level of specificity about buildings and building placement, et cetera. But a rezone can be, and frequently is, just an entitlement action to change the underlying zoning piece of property with no plan on it.
And so when you speak to, sorry to interrupt.
Well, I was gonna say, then is it appropriate to house that under that language? I mean, because, okay, not detailed development, but details of development. There's no, we don't think of development as, a rezone is not development. Well, but normal human beings don't think of it as that way.
So I would add, so one thing, I think that there's some language that could be added to clarify that. I would say though, to that effect, you could say that then we would require the applicant to discuss all of the types of developments that would be allowed under that zoning district. Because so I think we could add the details of the development or of the rezone. I mean, just add or of the zoning changes, or something to that effect to make it clear that that's under a separate pot. The reason why we really want to shy away from having rezones tied to developments is because a lot of times those developments don't come forward. So they get through the rezone process, the project doesn't pencil out. So you've rezoned a property. Worst case, you've put special limitations thinking there's a specific development. That project dies, or say it goes forward and it's in use for 3 years, and then there's a change of use, and now you have somebody who's trying to revitalize that property or redevelop that property, and now they're dealing with special limitations that they can't remove unless they go to the assembly. So it's better to look at it as, these are all the uses that are allowed in this, and are we comfortable with that? And the reality, with the uses, there's either going to be permitted uses or things that require an entitlement. And so if it's something that the community is probably not going to want as a by right use, they really need to be looking at, okay, what can be permitted here? And what are other things that we're going to see if they do build? So they can look at that and say, okay, well, we're comfortable with all of this because, yeah, if it's going to be a gas station, that's going to require conditional use, so they'll have to come back. They can't just do that.
John, we've got both community meetings and community councils. We need to have something that defines the amount of time. For example, this last rezone, we saw with community council, but it was the end of the meeting. The mayor's people had talked for a while. We only had just a few minutes to discuss it. So we need to figure out some way to build a time factor into this, because many people didn't think they had time to ask questions about it. And if we're gonna let them still do a community meeting, we need to give them some guidelines on what a community meeting involves.
I think that's what
We
we
should be there.
Yeah.
And if we have somebody from planning, it would be good to have some notes taken there. So if it ever comes to assembly, we can look back at notes from the planning department that's headed there.
Mr. Chair, I just have to add to that last point. Actually, the responsibility for documenting the minutes of the meeting falls on the applicant. And in a later subsection of the code I just read, it spells out precisely what the applicant's expected to present in their minutes back to the department.
They
And to the
send
community
minutes back to
council.
your department?
I'm sorry.
They send minutes back to your department?
So they have to require,
Reason back here.
Go ahead, Joe.
they're required to, the applicant is required within 7 days to provide notes to that meeting. They're supposed to email it and also copy the community council president so that the community council president has the opportunity to review what was discussed. It would not be appropriate to send planning staff to these meetings, one, because of resources, but most importantly, because the onus is on the applicant to make the argument for their project. And staff, we don't even discuss a staff report with the applicant until the director has signed it, because we want to make sure that we've had the opportunity to receive the applicant's argument, have it routed to all the appropriate departments, get their comments, the public comments, and to write a decision based on that. If staff is in a position that they're at that meeting at the same time as the applicant, that they could be put in a position to make comments based on what little information they have at the time and be held to that. There's a lot of conflict that could arise from that, and it's not appropriate at that time for staff to be at those meetings.
Thanks, Michelle. It's just the last rezone we had in his area was ugly on both sides. Both sides felt they were cheated somehow in getting their point of view out.
I don't want to diminish that because I agree with you, but I would like to say that this process has worked a lot of other times, and that this is really an example of it not going well, and I would want to not make changes to this based on that specific example and more on the norm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is a special occasion, I think. The the leadership of that community council was involved in the project, and typically that is not going to be the case. And so I think if we change our rules based on this one specific incident, you know, you're going to end up changing them the next time there's an incident. And we do have to try to keep them a little more generalized, I think.
And to speak to the time, I appreciate, again, I think this was a case of the way that was handled poorly.
Yep.
I would caution adding a time because, so I'm going to go back to when I was a consultant. I would have cases where I would show up and I'd have enough information to speak for 20 minutes and there would be 3 people there and they'd have no questions. I would do my presentation and I would leave. There were other times when I would take 20 to 25 minutes of somebody's community council, and a lot of that is driven by the community council leadership. They are the ones that need to recognize we're running late. Do we need to extend our meeting? This applicant, there are still a lot of questions and request that applicant come back. There was a lot of other things that could have handled, but if you say that you're required to stay for 10 minutes, what if the applicant speaks for 5 minutes and there's no questions? I mean, so I would caution putting a time limit on it, and maybe within that user's guide there could be language about how to maybe handle it in a situation where there's additional questions and you've run out of time in your meeting.
It's just that, if you let me, John, for a second. It's just right now, many of our community councils meet in schools. And there's a requirement of the school that they have to vacate the school by 9 o'clock. So if you have it come up 5 or 10 minutes before 9 o'clock hits, nobody's going to have any time to discuss it. So the community councils need to know that if this item is on their agenda, they need to have it come earlier in the meeting, so they're not the last 10 minutes before they got to get out of the building to conform to school district requirements. Because now all of them have to be out by 9 o'clock.
Thanks, Danielle.
Oh, I was just going to agree with Michelle's comment that it would be really premature for the staff to be commenting on the applicant's stuff. Everything can change at that point. It could impact how the community involves with them, and I really do think that you need to make the onus on the applicant and allow the flexibility for them to communicate their plan to them, because every plan is going to be so different.
And I would also add that having staff there gives the perception that staff is in support of or otherwise involved with the project. And we were actually in a situation where we did hold a meeting at the request, and it was appropriate. It was for a rezone, and there was a new assembly person, it was a new zoning district, and we've actually gotten a lot of flack from that, saying that the planning departments and developers, you guys wanted this, and we're kind of all of a sudden getting confused with the applicant, and that was an unintended consequence that we're kind of dealing with.
Thanks. Francis?
Oh, just to add on to that, this community meeting occurs before they've even made application. So, I mean, we haven't even received an application yet. And just to totally agree with what Michelle said, we don't want to look like we're aligned with, a particular faction, like a group of neighbors or the developer. Our role is to sort of be this neutral, looking at the code and each individual application or land use entitlement before us, and we don't want to, be able have the appearance of being aligned with any one group. We're working for the public and working, we're working towards implementing our comprehensive plan in the code, and that's our role.
Good, thanks. And the DeArmond rezone obviously stands out as a contentious, but we have another one coming to us, which is, you read the notes, it's very similar. The public wanted to know what his plans were, but when you're changing it, I think to I-2, there was just, I don't know if the details were on it, but I-2 or something, but there's so many different uses.
Yeah.
You can't, anyway, this is very common with rezones. I think, Danielle, you've probably seen it. Typically, they're asking questions that don't match up with what you need to know for a rezone.
And then the public feels like I asked all these questions and they didn't answer me, and so it creates.
So what are they hiding?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I do think it would be helpful to provide a guide for the applicant to show what scope they're trying to prove, because we get community members that come on into our meetings and they're arguing about a plating process when we're not even at that stage yet, and so then they leave feeling like they're not heard. And so we need to, I think, putting more of that in the user's guide of actually telling what the approval is for, and that allows the community members to shape their arguments and their concerns to the actual matter at hand, rather than the things that are going to come 10 steps later down the line.
Yeah, that's very common. So I wonder if, maybe Mark and Al, have you
We also have Carla McDonald, who is past president of Northeast Community Council and all, and she's also on a committee we have set up on this same theme independently of your email.
So we're looking at making, so people know when they go, what is a rezone, what is a replat, what can I expect, and so on. And there's no training for community council chairs or any board members. They don't know either. What role would you take, and what would work for you to get word out?
Well, right now, obviously, like was stated, a lot of the community council don't meet during the summertime, but they have executive board. So, kind of a number we're looking at right now, it's on 31 days prior to for us to give our thoughts on a certain item.
So I guess I'm gonna ask for clarification. You mean 31 days from what point?
Well, you require, there's gonna be a meeting, like, and you want comments on a certain item. And typically 31 days notice, because we get these things that are flyers, and like sometimes there's just before, just after our meeting, and we don't have another meeting for another 30 days, so we wanna have it so we can at least have a meeting sometime in between.
So educating our council would be one thing with things like rezone. But I think part of the reason why a lot of the councils feel uneasy about things like this is because of what we feel is a lack of, lead time on notices. Because of course, if the notice hits us just at the right time, it's not gonna make that council meeting at all.
So you're talking about the community council notices were gonna be on your agenda, or are you talking about the public hearing notices that the planning department sends out after an application has been submitted and there's a public hearing?
They're talking about the applications that we route to
It could be
them.
both though.
Well, no, I wanna make sure, so you are talking, so one of
We're
the
talking about lack of time for the community councils to weigh in on things like this.
So anything that requires, I mean, this is a good discussion, I don't know if this is the appropriate venue, it seems like it is, but we could probably have a sidebar too, but, so, an applicant is required to reach out to the community council president, confirm that they're gonna be on the agenda, and then send out notice 21 days in advance of that community council meeting, or whatever meeting is intended to be used to meet their required meeting. So, they, reach out hopefully 31 days or beyond, so that they can have time for the community council president to get back to them and confirm. And then they send out mailers to property owners within 500 feet of the first 50, I think within a mile, that they're gonna be on the agenda. So people receive little notices that there's gonna be something discussed. So that's one step of it. Hopefully at that point, the applicant has introduced the project. Some probably offer to come back, some probably don't, just depending on timing and probably funding. So then you're saying that once the application is submitted, you would like 31 days after reviewing that, or after so application submitted to the planning department?
I am not sure on that. May I ask the question if it's way off base? What is the process if the applicant does not present to us, to the community council?
We will not accept their application.
Absolutely 100%?
Yeah.
Absolutely 100%.
No,
they're
no.
doing a
I was gonna say, I don't think that that's
If
what's
it-
happening.
if-
Well, if it
requires-
is, so if it is an action, an entitlement that requires a public hearing, so we will not accept that application if it has not gone to the community council.
Right.
If it is a use that is either permitted and or an administrative approval that doesn't require a public meeting, then there's no requirement that they speak to the community council prior to submitting their
Right.
application.
So it seems to me that in Title 21, and I don't know if this aligns with what you're talking about, it basically says if you miss this process, it's still okay to move forward. Correct?
So let me read it out loud, because I think, unless we're confusing the topics here. In particular, the section that deals with community meetings, it says, the applicant shall use as its first choice the community council meeting of the project area as the community meeting when the community council meeting is available. If an applicant chooses not to use the community council for community meeting. The applicant must provide a written explanation to the director outlining the reason for this decision. And that explanation shall be available to the appropriate board or commission at the time of review. So there is an out for the community meeting to not occur at the council.
So for clarification, a community meeting has to occur. We will not accept an application where that community meeting has not occurred. I think primarily we're seeing that they are using the community councils because that's a neutral location, it's occurring at a regular time. And it's the easiest way.
Francis?
Through the chair, I just wanted to say, because this is a great opportunity to provide information. So the planning department is a resource for the public, for community council. So I get calls from community council presidents and members of the public on applications all the time. Before they've submitted an application, after they've submitted an application, after they've received approval. So the planning department and our general phone number, we are a resource to answer questions about Title 21 and development process all the time. So it's not like, well, your only shot at this as a community council president to understand something is when they come before you, or once you receive this application and it's too confusing with this legal language, you don't know what it means or something like that. You don't have to be an expert in any of these. I explain what's at issue in the most basic terms that anyone can understand. So you just call the planning department. I receive calls all day long from members of the public and community councils that just want an explanation. What is this about? Yeah.
So it sounds like you've experienced, and so I'm curious of what those actions were, because we do have some actions like variances that go to the zoning board of examiner appeal. That is a public hearing, but does not require a community council meeting. So I'm curious if some of the actions that you maybe have seen go forward, but haven't come to the community council, fall within one of these uses that aren't required to have a community meeting. So it would be good to kind of understand what you're seeing, because we don't, one of the things we do, so the way, just to kind of even take a step further back, so we have several things that have to happen before we'll accept an application. One is there has to be this community meeting, and the other is that there has to be a pre-application meeting. So when an applicant comes in, they submit one copy of, after they've completed all that, put all the information that's required in the application together, they bring in one copy to the planning department. I think twice a week, current planning sits down and they go through all of the one copies, and they make sure that everything that's required is included in that package. Then if there's anything that needs to be inserted or revised, we let the applicant know. They are then come back with that additional information, and then the 35 copies that we then route. It's not until that point that they have come back with, and we've all confirmed that they have all the information that's required, that we will accept payment and actually issue a case number. So we do have, and part of checking that is they are supposed to provide a flyer or whatever mailer they use, postmarked, so that we can actually see what date that was mailed out. They need to provide us a summary of how many did you mail out, and we're actually providing the applicants as a free service, so they are using us the mail out list that they're required. So we even know, so if anything's even questionable, we can go back to the folks in our office who actually provide that list, and we can confirm that they have requested that list and that they did mail it out.
One little trick, if I may, Mark Butler, is to put your address or your office's address on the list also. So
Yeah.
if the packet goes out, then it also comes to you.
That's
You
a
can say,
good
aha, here's one. Now it can be gamed and they can send that out, but not others. So communications between the assembly and development issues has been an issue that different people, Al, Carla, and others have brought up recently. And anger over, gee, we didn't know about this, we didn't know about that, right?
I'm doing my anger face.
Yeah, there you go. So, and these are experienced community council people that we have here. So we even set up, the FCC delegates set up a committee, and they've met for a couple months about this exact issue. So people assume, since I know you well, John, that I had back-channeled you on this. But this came out of the blue, your request to be, this is an interest, a topic of interest. Right now, there is four items particular about the development approval process that have caught the attention of our committee, and I'd like to pass those out if that's okay. All right, and so we are working at the FCC. The delegates are working on those issues, and they've developed, they've pointed out to me before. Which I mean, yeah. So I'll just go around real quick. So this is highlights from Title 21 that they have picked out. Okay, and so this is obviously not the whole document, but these are a few pages. So what's in yellow, Matt Cruikshank has done some real good work. He's from Birchwood on this issue. We have, okay. So obviously Title 2103 review and approval process. Okay. The public scheduled the hearing, the public notice. On the second page there, which is page 311 of the original document, had line items he wrote in, utility comprehensive plan, infrastructure changes on utility easements with written notice, because there have been some challenges on community councils receiving a bunch of, all of a sudden the utility comes through and says, well, we can do this and we're going to go ahead. AWW, main water trunk line through Birchwood and Shukiak area is one of them that has triggered that. So that's an interesting comment. The next one, which is on page 312 of the original document, third page of this document, instead of 500 feet, the suggestion is going to be by our FCC committee that it goes to 1,000. Obviously, that's more names. Downtown, or my North Star Community Council, that would be a whole bunch more people. But in Birchwood, that may take it from 5 properties to 10 properties.
It would never be 5 because you have a minimum of 50.
Right. 50 parcels. Okay, I'm sorry, but I mean, I'm just trying to say that you would be. Then the next one is noticed by on the bottom, page 312 of this again. Community councils. The suggestion is that it's be at least 31 days. That means that the councils get it. They may not pick it up at the mailbox or at the community council center for a week or so, but then they get it and they're able to go through a cycle of the council. Another issue, and they can both speak to this, of course, is a comment that says, failure of a party to receive written notice shall not invalidate subsequent action. So this, to me, to the committee, is a complete opt. You can do all these wonderful things, but if they don't get the paperwork, oh well. So we're still moving on. So that kind of gives you a complete out from any of the requirements.
I don't want to get you all too far off what you're trying to do here, but let us know how we can help educate our councils on things like the rezones, and in turn, consider giving us just a bit more lead time so that we can put it through the board meeting and put it through the general meeting.
And I just want to clarify, so again, when you're saying lead time, that's about when we send out our
Lead time, just enough time for us to get it through a 1-month cycle, for it to hit the board meeting and hit the general.
And you're talking about when the application has been submitted in the planning department.
However it takes.
Okay.
So that we don't get the notice 2 days after the board meeting, or 5 days after the board meeting, or 1 day before the general meeting, that we miss a cycle, that we can't get the community back together to discuss the issues.
So typically, and what I'd like to understand where your guys are having problems, because when an application is submitted, most deadlines that are tied to a public hearing, there's a 45-day period. And so it seems as though there should be an occurrence for a meeting to happen during that 45 days. And so I'm just, yeah, so it would be interesting to understand where maybe the issues are, so that we can.
For our meeting today, I think we have some direction here.
Yeah.
Where great news is they're working on it.
Yeah.
Great news is you're working on it.
Yeah.
And all heading pretty much the same direction. And some of their comments are things that we dealt with when we were rewriting this, and they have some kernels of legitimacy in there. I'm going to real quick to go to Dick and then Pete. And
Just in '75, when we had the charter come together, that allows community councils to comment. We had many community councils would take the summers off. That size of acreage is gone now. So I keep telling you guys, I told you with marijuana, we need to have constant feedback from community councils. I'm sorry, it's a large town now. We cannot have 3 months taken off. Because I hear the complaint, well, they're doing this when we're not meeting. So the community councils need to have a system where they come together they can't take off, is what I'm trying to say.
We do, we don't take off.
I know, but you're one community council. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is we need to make sure all of them have that same vehicle so that this will never happen again.
Dick,
I mean, Pete's there.
And, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and, you know, I've been to numerous meetings where people say, well, you know, I never got the memo, I didn't get the notice, and then they go check the list, and, well, you were mailed one, and so sometimes they get the notice and they don't notice it, and it goes, you know, and so it's easy to say, well, we never got the notice, as an excuse.
Well, no, I think,
well, there's no reason for a community council not to respond in the summertime meetings because we have executive boards.
Board
That's
meeting.
our job as executive board is to handle these situations out of the cycle. So, and I'm reiterating this at our FCC meeting to tell their council that's no excuse. So, we agree with you on that part.
Can I ask one question before we go off the topic?
Yeah, we'll make a round go ahead for it.
So for the folks in the community council, and you were going back and forth with Michelle, but I kind of want to put a point on this. So we're discussing the community meeting requirement. That is, they have to go and explain themselves to a community council or somewhere else. And they have to do 21 days notice before that. But they have to schedule that meeting first, right? So it kind of seems like it could be 60 days before. You know, it's really up to your guys' schedule. And if your community council says, well, we can't get you on in September, but we can get you on in October, is that okay? That should be fine, unless they're like in a real rush, right?
Correct. I think in that case, then, the applicant, depending on their schedule, may
Yeah.
decide at that point that they're going to not go to the community council and hold their own community meeting, which they would be allowed to do.
Yeah.
But then the community council would need to say, but we still want you to come back. So it could be that in that case, the required notice meeting that they have to get their application in would be their own special meeting
Yeah.
that they hold. But then they could go back, and I would hope they would go back as a courtesy to the community council at that later date. But in that instance, I think we want to allow that flexibility, but they may not go to the community council at that point.
But I guess I'm trying to understand how their request for 31 days fits with the public meeting requirement, or not the community meeting requirement. So,
Mr. Chairman, an important point to this, and I think this might help some community councils, is there is a published schedule of cutoff dates for all of the different town and processing boards that says, if you get, I just pulled it up for planning and zoning, for example, if I turned in an application to the department on Monday, March 26th, the soonest I could go before the body is June 4th. So there's already a built-in time lag between when applications for any action are due and when they actually have their first chance to be in front of the board. And that's no guarantee, because these agendas fill up very quickly.
but this is all the community meetings before they even submit an application.
Right, so it adds
That's
to
what I'm
that
saying.
by
It's-
still.
There's an added buffer after the community meeting on top of all of this.
Correct, 'cause I think we're talking about two things. I think there's one, the community noticing the meeting prior to the application. But I think Carla may be speaking about after that application is submitted, then there's another clock that starts. And they're saying, once they've seen the formal application, so when you go to the community council for the community meeting, it's kind of your first kind of pitch at this. And I think as you get stuff back, then you actually you have your plan. You submit an actual application, and that's what you're probably saying. You want the council to have time to review, not necessarily have the applicant come back, but a chance for the community council to.
Maybe it's just Northeast, although I think when we talked in front of the FCC and everybody jumped on board with saying that nobody's getting notices in time, that it's probably not Northeast alone. But I feel like we get a notice, and the the hearing in front of P&Z is 3 days late. And then what do we do with that? Now, you're saying that's impossible, but I'm telling you, it's a big issue.
Well, we have a 21-day requirement that we have to notice after the application. We have to do it 21 days ahead of time before the public hearing.
Okay.
Okay, we gotta wrap up. We got Francis, Danielle.
Two really important points, and just for the benefit of everyone, just to understand the process in totality. So, a property owner who wants to apply for an entitlement on their property budgets about 6 months to get through the process for a conditional use permit, a site plan review, one of these public hearings. And for a rezone, it's 9 months or a year, okay? And the community council receives the application before the planner even gets it. So when an applicant has gone through the community meeting and had the pre-application conference, submits an application, makes payment, and gets it in, it's more or less sent right then to the community council and the reviewing agencies like the municipal traffic engineer and all of these things. And so it's put in the mail and shared with the community council and these different reviewing agencies even before, I mean, very, very early on is when we receive it.
And I would add to that, it also goes online immediately.
Yes.
Danielle?
I think one of the points that we're kind of hearing is that yes, notice is going out, but it's not going out in a manner in which the public now receives information. I think that our notice requirements are out of date. I think sending stuff only by mail is doing us a disservice. I think this would be a great opportunity to try to loop in someone like Brendan Babb to do some coding, to like make it more of an interactive map that then sends out electronic notices that directly brings people to the area. And I think really our notice requirements are out of date because I completely agree with Pete that, you know, if we're sending out the notice based on the law, we can't ask applicants to go above and beyond that because that's unfair. And if we're picking and choosing when they do that, that is unfair to the applicant. But in the same regards, if we're not sending it out in a manner that it can't just be like, we should be able to rely on our community council delegates to kind of cipher out that information, but we also need to send it directly to the residents because we've gone to those community council meetings and there's like maybe 20 people that are showing up. And so we can't just rely on our community councils to send out that information. And so I really think we need to update our notice requirements.
Mark?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing today is I learned some stuff about the development process, and I've been doing this for 12 years and working on issues in my North Star Community Council and listening to people who try to help them on theirs. Excuse me. Excuse me. There you go. Energy. So obviously, I think what I clearly heard is there's an education component here that we haven't had yet. So we need to be able to educate people. This is the process, and these are your opportunities for input. And I've heard you guys here say things I didn't know about. So I think that has to happen as part of this, and I assume it will. And I hope that we can put some good energy into that, because I don't think community people want to stop development just because it's bad. Some perhaps do, but most really want to know. As one example, you mentioned they need to share about the change in zoning, not what their specific plans are. Well, on Diamond and whatever that property is. I'm sorry?
Diamond and Arlene.
Right. That was a very big Sand Lake thing. People are like, wait a minute, is this a 5-story building? Is this a 7-story building? But if instead they learn from the developer, we want to change zone, or the potential developer, the owner, we want to change zoning, which would allow us to do this, this, and this. Then people could go, okay, ooh, it could be a 7-story building or not. Because in that case, people called me up and said, hey, this building, they promised a 3-story building and now it's a 7-story building. Well, whatever. And so if it's a rezone, then what are the potential uses changed because of that rezone? And that's something I've never heard before.
And I would argue most people, when they get to the rezone, already know what they want to do to that piece of property, whether you guys are through with me or not.
Well, they probably know, but that doesn't necessarily matter because the development can fall through, or also they could sell the property, or we have to think about the consequences down the line. That just because I'm building a 3-story,
if they can't give specifics, they're probably not being.
So it's a broken promise that they do share the specifics, because we have to take the 100-year long view that any of the uses under that zoning could be placed there.
And
I don't disagree with that, I'm just saying.
And I think they might have a general idea, but because of how long the rezone process goes, there's a high likelihood that within that year that things have probably changed. But I don't disagree with you.
And by the way, Pete and Forest, Baltazar is the perfect example of where the
Right.
rezone went absolutely.
Some people already make the changes and then they come to the community council and ask for forgiveness,
They did,
you
and
know?
that's exactly what, twice.
Okay, that's a separate wrong.
Can I just ask one question on this? So, are these proposed changes, I guess I have some comments and just, I don't know, I don't
These
want to.
things are what the committee's working on at this time.
Okay.
Just looking at these issues. And I assume they would love to have staff help come and talk and bring up other issues, whatever.
So, kind of to move on, kind of waiting for Dean, but we can move on with that. We don't want to go too long. So, but I think we have some clear direction. As you know, I mean, clearly the need is there. It's been there for a long time. Just make it more clear what each of these rezone and replat and so on are and what they require. Their request for more notice has been a typical thing from when I was chair, 2000. It's a long time. So we need to figure out some way to deal with that, and I think there is.
The new signage is.
We have new signs. There's lots of little things we can do.
I think it's, I'd actually like to put a flow chart to actually show when the
Right.
notices are happening, so we can illustrate.
Right.
Well, and that could be done electronically like Danielle was talking about.
And I think what we're looking at, I'll get to you in a moment, is, so you're looking to kind of write up, saying, won't change code, you're just gonna have an educational document that the, the citizens, community council can look at, and also developer knows what to expect. But I think there are some words in the code that are misleading. And one is, when we say details, that's misleading when you look at rezones. Or if people are looking, we want details. What color will that be? Where's the roof? Where's the lot? Where's the driveway? Okay, that's not relevant. So it's misleading. In code, we need to consider small wording change probably in there. And then also when we say in the purpose statement for rezones, where it says you can't do this unless it's necessary to develop the property. I don't know exact, but that necessary, that's tripping us up, because you can develop any property under its current zoning.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that's good use of that property.
So
that
I
makes-
I looked up that language and I actually copied it, and I didn't grab it, but let me look at it real fast. And we can talk offline, but I agree, I went back and I looked at that language, and I don't think it says necessary for development.
It says zoning is not effective if too easily or frequently changed. Zoning is intended to provide a degree of certainty that is important for long-term investment and neighborhood cohesion and stability. The purpose of rezoning is not to relieve particular hardships, nor to confer special privileges or rights to any person, but to make adjustments to the official zoning map that are necessary in light of changed conditions or changes in public policy, or that are necessary to advance the general welfare of the municipality.
That word necessary is tripping us up, saying, no, you can.
Helpful.
It's something, but that's true, that's misleading people. I mean, whether it's technically true or not, we heard that. In this rezone, we're gonna hear it on that one off of C Street.
Okay.
Is it necessary? And you're right, saying no, you can do a lot of that stuff without it. So, but I would consider some code changes to be more clear language.
In planning white papers, rezones are typically spur of development. And so if you want to see building, or if you feel that there's a need for, say, housing construction or these sorts of things, a rezone is, from what land we have now, it's a rezone that typically spurs that type of development that we want to see as a community. So it is necessary for a lot of the projects to
For
proceed.
some, but you could say, but if he can still build houses there, it's not necessary to rezone it to build houses. So that's tripping it up. Danielle, and then we'll move on.
I just want to, we had talked earlier at the beginning about this, about creating a user's guide for the applicant. I think one thing to be very helpful is, I've been on the community council, now been on the planning commission, and there's really kind of a disconnect on how these projects are pitched in both areas, and that makes sense both in skill level and the time and the detail oriented towards it. But when you're at the community council level, they're not sending them the approval criteria. And if you're a community council member, you can't shape your argument to that if you don't have that. So I think making the applicant present the approval criteria that's needed down the line and having them outline how it fits that approval criteria would be helpful.
Absolutely. They get that with the application, though.
Yeah, like they get it at the application stage, but not, like, I think having the applicant present that when they're going to the community council would be very helpful.
I think that there should be a way to put that in the dialogue, of just saying,
Mhm.
how does this address more moving the comp plan? How does this protect health and safety? Which ideally they should be having that conversation.
And that is a critical piece. What are the relevant issues? Okay, so you're going to work on it. What kind of time frame do you need?
It probably won't.
Be
We had.
realistic, 2 months, 3?
Oh no, it's going to be a couple months. It's going to be at least 6 months.
6 months.
I'm going to say that so that we don't disappoint you.
Okay.
We have a lot of other things on
Okay, that's fine.
our list.
Okay, so we'll kind of pencil it in for kind of come back by September. And then, and you can stay in touch with everyone else who are kind of their process. Does that work? And you can meet with them
Yeah,
periodically?
I think that'd be great because I think that there's obviously some communication that we need to
Yeah,
shore
no,
out.
it's excellent, okay. Good, good.
Thank you.
How about this more out?
Sure. Okay, well, thanks for bringing all this, everybody. Okay, so we have, next up, Dean won't be making it. We have 3A is draft ordinance on removal of debt disclosure requirement for marijuana license transfer applications. And I think Dean is going to write something up, so we don't have that.
We do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Did we get that? Goes here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. We'll have Natalie present.
So I kind of worked on it too.
Do you
So,
want to go through it?
this is just the basic of what we talked about. Dean is still reviewing and making sure that we've caught all of the parts of code that mention that. But the two main ones are the 1080-045 and the 1080-080. And so it was just taking out at the bottom of page 1, line 42, taking out number 2 that's requiring that statement of all debts. And then similarly, in 080, it's taking out 2, and then we just did the renumbering.
Does he think there may be more he wants to check for?
You know, I actually did this draft, and so he's reviewing it to make sure. But I did a search and I didn't see anything else, but he's kind of the whiz at that, so.
Okay, so what's the committee think on this? It seems fairly simple. We can say, okay, be fine, and write an AO and we move it to the assembly. Or do you want to come back here? I mean, the concept is pretty simple.
Right, I don't think it needs to come back, does it?
I
I read it this morning, and I thought, and I read it, 2 weeks ago when we were, or 3 weeks ago, whenever it was we talked about it the last one. That seemed fairly commonsensical to me.
So I would recommend that we make a motion to send this to the full assembly with unless you're opposed to it, Dick, with a committee recommendation for passage.
I'm
I
not
think we
aiding,
need to see,
okay?
it may change.
Well, my point would be this, why don't we put this on the agenda, and then if he finds something that's changed, we can amend it.
Yeah.
Because it's a pretty simple.
Yeah, and I think it wouldn't even be a major changes if he added, it would be a similar, if there's one other place, just taking out that same language.
John, I agree with him. Let's just send it.
Okay. So, and did you want, so there's a motion to recommend this change?
Recommend, motion to have this be, could we maybe we just want to make this a committee ordinance?
Good.
We could do a committee ordinance, and do we want to recommend approval, or?
Well, if it's committee
Anything
ordinance,
else
it
on the
would
committee?
recommend approval.
That's your back.
Yeah, that's does that work? Okay, you got that, Mandy?
Yep.
Okay, so I would watch the title. I see a comment. Make sure the title will encompass any amendment. You know, if you find, if it mentions these two sections, and you find something in another section, we want to trip up on that.
So we're not gonna make it for introduction until for the 19th anyway.
I don't think this is not a crisis
rush.
issue, Chris. Is it?
Not that I've heard.
All right, so it's a nice thing to get done. It simplifies things,
Some
but
point
it's a
in
month
April.
or 2 months.
You can get it in paper sometime.
No
Not
one's
that I've
clamoring
heard
for
that
this
this
right
is
now.
where that goes.
Okay.
I think it was a good time to have it. I won't be here.
That's right.
Does that work, Mandy? Okay. Okay, so the next thing is draft of code to meet changes with state regulations.
And so this one is the second look at it. This incorporated the changes that the committee desired from the previous meeting. We took out all of the references that didn't seem to apply. So we left our code similar, and so these are just the changes that the committee said they wanted to keep. And then I do have a couple of notes. Dean is also still reviewing this one for final.
And this, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is the one that there was an additional, correct me if I'm misremembering this, there was an additional state requirement that everyone that's a potential owner was going to have, you know, a marijuana handler's card. And we decided not to put it into our regulations, is that right?
Right.
Good, that's what I want. I don't want to mirror the state in that regard.
Yeah, some of these businesses got 50 owners, so.
Yeah, and if the state, like, you know, the state can enforce their own regulations and they can't operate anyway. They can't get their state license, they can't come with us.
So we have, it's in here, any employee or, so any of those people who are required or permitted to be physically present.
Yeah, so that was the change that we took out. So it was, when it separated out the licensee, and then it was the two portions, all of the references to that we took out and left it as we have it, so.
Okay, so this is current word in here. This very, section
Yep,
5.
yep.
Okay, so someone who owns the company but doesn't go there, not required to be there.
Yeah.
But if they are physically present, so if they go to buy something at the store, this implies that they need to have a permit.
Required or permitted to be physically present.
Yeah, this is one of the changes that the state.
Permitted to be.
Oh, it is. So we did,
Yeah.
so it is in there
So
still?
the change that we took out was so the state change on that same line was shall ensure that each licensee, employee, or agent. They changed it to being each licensee employee who is required to be on the premises, and then they moved agent down and had it as a separate, required to be on premises.
So would we scratch agent, what is agent then?
Oh, I don't have the definitions.
I thought the state can also add the word owner in there.
I should have brought the previous
So
one.
licensee, that would be your licensee if you're one of 20 owners, your licensee.
Or
So
affiliate,
if you're
yeah.
one of 20 owners,
Oh, I see.
who is required or permitted, you're permitted to use the property. And if you just want to shop there, you need to handle it. That makes sense. Ryan, are you tracking all this?
Yeah.
You know, we probably need to change the wording somehow a little bit.
So that's an add-in that they did too, and that we can choose not to, if it pertains to the previous one. Jed, do you know that?
The question again?
Yeah.
Definition of agents or?
Yeah. Well, so for the previous change with the separating out each licensee employee and then the agent, the who is required or permitted to be physically present on the licensed premises at any time, was that in reference to those separations and?
Yeah, I gotta find that specific regulation here real quick. Just back up. Agent specifically means a representative who's authorized to act for a licensee, the board, or the director. And that's in state regulation. My understanding is that the change in regulation that took place on February 21st requires all licensees, regardless of whether they are required to be on the premises or not, to have a marijuana handler permit. So if there are 50 licensees on a license, 50 investors on a license, they're all required to have a handler permit, regardless of whether they're involved in the direct operation of the business or not.
Some of these owners could possibly not even live in Alaska, right?
No, there's a residency requirement.
Oh, for to be an investor owner, you have to live in Alaska?
But you could have, I mean, we look like Great Northern's got so many owners. You know,
Right.
they're totally remote from any decision making. And this, the way this reads, if they went in just to buy something, they'd have to have a card. Because then because they are physically present on the premises.
They're not, they wouldn't be required.
If they're permitted,
This is required or permitted to be, so you're permitted to shop. And if we crossed out or permitted,
I get it.
required to be physically.
I'm curious about the phrase "at any time." So at any time, so the way I read this, who is required or permitted to be physically present on the licensed premises at any time. You could read that in sort of two ways. So if they can go in during normal business hours, that's a time. But you could also read this to say they have to be one of the people who can go in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? They must be able to go in at any time. They must have the ability to go in at any time. Is that what the intent is here?
And a lot of employees, you wouldn't allow them to go in any time.
That's my point. And so maybe the people that can't, if the licensee couldn't go in at 3 a.m., maybe they don't need a marijuana handler's card, because I kind of do see that logic. If you have the ability to go into this at any time and like take inventory, then there's some logic to it. And if you are one of 50 owners of Great Northern Cannabis, presumably 45 of those owners can't go in at 3 a.m. But is that what at any time means?
I mean, I think that the intention behind the regulation, my understanding, was to give the board and the AMCO office a little bit more control over being able to penalize a licensee if there was an action taken. I mean, really, like my understanding is a lot of this regulation came back to the Canabasca issue, where the board wanted to revoke the handler permit of the owner as a sort of de facto way of prohibiting them from operating. So, right, like if the owner of Canabasca is not allowed to be on a license or isn't directly involved in the operation of the business, but then you revoke their handler permit, then they're not allowed to operate if they don't have a valid handler permit.
But we shut them down, and there are other ways to shut them down, right?
Okay. Yeah.
They have the state. My understanding is the Marijuana Control Board has almost plenary authority over these licensees. I don't know. That's baffling to me. You're going to make a huge class of people have to get an unnecessary license.
Well, that's state. I mean, we're not going to. So we don't have to. I mean, we can say we don't require it here, and you would have to enforce it or in some way.
It's still a state requirement.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what we're looking for is to have some wording here that says what? I mean, one concept. If you're an owner who's not really managing or operating, you don't really need to get one.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'd like to see the old language.
So what it had originally changed to, with the state change and the underline, they removed licensee, employee, or, so it was to ensure that each agent who is required or permitted to be physically present on the licensed premises at any time and then obtains. So they were specifying for the handler and the food safety that the agent, and then the licensee and employee was swapped out.
Mr. Chairman.
You see, Dick, real quick. Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll admit I don't know Title 10 as well as I know Title 21, so I'm not sure if this would fix or further complicate the issue. But just a suggestion, if the concern is that a licensee wanted to go in, it was just an investor wanted to go and purchase product, and now they need a marijuana handler's permit card. If you added language, so it would read, who is required or permitted to be physically present within the restricted access area within the licensed premises at any time. They could still go into the sales floor, purchase product, they just wouldn't be able to go behind the counter or into that back inventory room or into the cultivation space.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's that's it. So if you get into the restricted area, but also if you were controlling the work, though, if you were telling employees not to operate.
Yeah.
So if you had that authority, it seems like you need it. But that's a good.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I would add the word unaccompanied, because if a licensee, I would also say if a licensee went in there and their manager was there who had a handler's card, and it's like, hey, why don't you take me back? I want to look at our inventory. I want to look at our back office area. I think it should be totally permitted. You're one of the owners of the company, and I don't think that should require you to get a handler's permit to do.
Well, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think possibly we could add language to create classes of owners for, and consider them active or inactive. So if someone is just an investor and they're inactive, then they wouldn't need a marijuana handler's card. But if they're active in the business, you know, even if they're only doing the banking, or I mean, not banking, handling the cash or whatever, then they would need one.
I think, I would like to see what our existing code looks like right now. Because this is, I'm understanding this is like a, is it just?
So the underlying
without
portion
the-
is missing, yeah, so it's just the front portion of it. A marijuana product manufacturing facility shall ensure that each licensee, employee, or agent obtains a marijuana handler permit, and then 1 and 2.
That's interesting, because that could also be read to interpret, that could also be interpreted as saying that every licensee is having a handler's permit.
This is just says testing, so we're dealing with everything. Section 5.
So I'm looking at section 4, that's
you're
the
on-
I was looking at
handler
four. I'm looking at
permit and
4.
food safety
Sorry.
training.
I've been looking at
5 is
4.
testing.
Yeah, testing, I mean, testing is, I'm less concerned about, they have all kinds of crazy requirements.
And this, for the
them,
testing,
really.
it's a general requirement of the other 3 licenses. They just didn't have it for the testing, and so now they've added it to be consistent with the other 3.
Yeah, any thoughts, Chris?
Well, just kind of like our situation, you know, we have somebody that is an owner who really doesn't come on premises, he's money, but every now and then he wants to come in and just look around and see his progress, see what his money is doing. He doesn't do any banking, he doesn't look at look at anything else, he just wants to see where his money's going. So, would he require a handling permit? I made him do it.
And I think under the state requirements,
So-
yes.
Right, so
Yeah.
I had him do the handling course, but he has been to our building maybe twice in a year.
So what kind of hurdle is this getting this card? What does it take?
I'm dealing with a doctor, so, they're a special breed of people, so, you know, less hoops, the better. So I did a lot of the work for him, to get him to the point where he could take the test and everything. So to some people, you know, it's a lot of hoops. You have to go get a background check, or a background check. You have to take the test. Just getting to the point to take the test is difficult for some people.
Is that an hour, 15 minutes online?
About 2 hours.
And you go somewhere?
No, it's just online. I actually have to renew mine, so I just did it. So it was about an hour. It was no big deal. But there are certain hoops, you have to go someplace to get this. And then the AMCO is open 3 days a week from 9:30 to 11. So then you have a smaller window there. So for somebody that's been visiting our building for twice in a year, does he need to go through all that too? So that's.
Yeah, people can be investors in restaurants and bars. Do we make every single person that's a part owner of a bar have a TAMS card? And if we do.
Yes, to handle that,
But to handle it.
But
No, no,
if you-
okay, you know, if you're serving, absolutely, but if you are a part owner of a restaurant, right, okay.
Right.
So if you, that to me is the key distinction. If you're handling marijuana, if you are involved in the cultivation of it or the sale of it, absolutely you need a handler's card. But if you're one of many investors, we're supposed to be regulating marijuana like alcohol, and this is a place where it seems like we're going much further on marijuana than we are on alcohol. And I think it's both bad policy, and I think it's just, I don't know, unfair.
Yeah, I still think creating the class of owners as active or inactive would solve the problem.
We create an investor class.
It maybe it's too simple, but
An investor.
Maybe with a
deal
definition?
Products itself.
you'd probably have to
What's
create a
that
definition of
looks
what
like?
active and inactive is, yeah.
I think you could do that. My preference would be to, rather than do that, just restrict who actually needs to get this card and try to cabin that and say like, okay, who actually needs to have this card? Should people be people that have, that are growing the marijuana or manufacturing the products or selling the marijuana? People who are actually handling it should have the handler's card.
you know, thinking of, I mean, this all makes sense, but the reality is who needs to have one is what they say. So
Yeah, I mean,
we could just
ultimately
change
it's-
it, if the state requires it, you must have it. We could just change the wording to that.
Or we could just leave it completely out of our regulations, because my worry with that is that means that we have to enforce that. So we've said you must meet the state requirements, but if the state isn't doing, like in the liquor industry, for example, right now, the state stops doing significant, and no offense to you, Jed, I'm talking about the resource constraints. If they stop doing serious regulation, then, but we can tell that they're violating the state regulations, then we have to go out and enforce the state regulations. And I don't want to do that. I would rather just take it out of our regulations.
But then we can't enforce them, and I would like to be able to say.
Well, we could tattle on them to the state, and we can always pull it for other reasons.
Yeah, but we don't require it. We
Well,
have to have the
that's
other reason.
Yeah.
If you had untrained people, I mean, what is the reality on the ground? Is that getting that card teaching people valuable stuff they need to know?
Yes.
So it is important that people
Definitely, it's
handling
important.
marijuana know.
But for somebody that just gave money to do their business, no.
Right.
They don't need to know that.
But people
My
handling
partner
marijuana.
didn't need to know that. He doesn't care. He just wants to see money.
It's when those money's coming in.
Well, it's like, you can own stock in Exxon, you have to be a petrochemical engineer.
And you don't have to go to their annual meetings either.
So, I mean, we could just say, refer to follow state code too often. And then we could, if they're not doing that, then we could take them, right? And that keeps it pretty simple and real.
Yeah.
We don't have anything different, it's just what they require. Now, if they change it, we go back and revisit.
Well, and also, I mean, if we do that caveat of must be in compliance with state requirements, then even if they change it, we're still covered because.
Yeah, it does, I agree with that, and that is a pretty elegant solution. It's what we do in the military right now with UCMJ. We just say, for this provision, we just follow whatever the feds say. The problem is when the state does something, we're kind of giving our blessing to a regulatory change of the state that I think is a silly change.
Maybe, but it's the real. I mean, my bigger worry is that then AMCO goes, all right, we don't need these cards anymore. It's too much hassle. And now all of a sudden, and I like that people holding marijuana would have to know these rules. So then we have to scramble real quick and say, yes, they do in Anchorage. But the odds of that happening is pretty slim.
Yeah. I mean, the cards are not only there to sort of educate the person who's selling the marijuana, they're also used in the inventory tracking system to track the product as it moves from establishment to establishment, which is a huge concern when it comes to diversion. So.
Yeah, but again, that makes all total sense for people that are actually handling the product.
So what do you want to do? Just say follow state code, go in here and tweak this, and in a sense, I mean, Pete says, if we say active and inactive, we have to define those, and that's kind of how we're heading here. Inactive would be, they don't go on there and handle marijuana. Inactive would be, they may do that. So we could either create new categories to do that, or just word it in here. Anyone who goes in there and handles marijuana or can go in a restricted area needs the card. So we got kind of two different ways. Yeah.
I'd rather just make it follow state regulations. We can always come back and address this if there's a problem. Let's just tell them, follow state regulations. Keep us out of it.
I don't know, what do you think about the inactive or active idea, Jed? I mean, is that something you think that the board might consider, or?
I mean, this regulation was just adopted, so I don't necessarily see them repealing a regulation that they just adopted or changing that. I don't have any details on the specifics of enforcement of this regulation. I know that it's a conversation we've had, but I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So
We're on.
What's up, Ethan?
Good heavens.
That's just in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Good morning.
do you have a marijuana handler permit?
I do not have a marijuana handler permit.
So it's
I
not-
don't want one of those
I
permits.
think if you're a mayor of any town that has a marijuana shop, you ought to have one.
There we go.
Add that in. So Forrest, you don't want to just refer to state.
Well,
requirements.
I get the logic there, and I do understand the sort of elegance of making our regulations simpler, and I do appreciate that. On the other hand, I'm like, fundamentally in disagreement with the regulation the state just passed.
Yeah.
And if we make that change that says refer to state, then it's like we condone it in a way that I don't like.
Okay.
Can we punt this and have Dean here and talk about it, or, or can we just not do anything and just leave our regulations how they are? I mean, that.
Well,
Because
I
regulations.
think some of the changes we do want to incorporate, adding in the
Accessory
A for
facilities.
section 5, on section 3F, there's a new application that they have, and I think that that's a valuable
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not.
change. So some of the other ones,
Yeah,
but I
the
would
other
say
ones. I'm
with
just
the
saying for
handler
section
permit,
4.
it probably wouldn't matter.
Right,
if
we
didn't change.
have had a regulation for the last however many years that operates in such a way where the people we think need to have handler permits have to have handler permits, and those that don't, which I don't think we've really gone down that road much in our enforcement, but we haven't been actively going and checking that Pat Flynn and Andrew Halcrow have handler permits. And the state wants to go do that, fine. But my point is, if we just left the regulations how they are now, then we are how we've been for the last 2 years, and I feel how we've been for the last 2 years is fine. I vote no change.
I like that. Okay.
So that which would be, well, not no change in general, because I think Mandy's right, but like removing section 4.
Let's, that's simple and quick. So do you want to, maybe just pass that, so we can look at this next time? Is that right? There's no big rush. They have to follow state law no matter what we do. Just show that recommendation to you, is either just say refer to state code, maybe you could write that and show us what it looks like, or just get his thoughts on removing section 4.
Okay.
And then we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
We might end this meeting early.
We might,
because
but,
I'm a
well,
long
because I
time.
have a couple thoughts. One thing is, we have this code, now they changed something to allow pole signs, was that, but we haven't
Oh,
addressed
really?
that here. Is that correct?
Detached pole signs.
Is that a-
Or detached signs,
It's not a current draft regulation that's up for public comment, to my knowledge. I haven't seen any proposed drafts yet.
Where did I
Yeah,
get the
they
idea
talked
that it was
about it.
done? Oh, they're just talking about it,
Yeah.
okay, so we can wait on that.
Drafts, yeah.
But we do
That I've
have,
seen.
okay, we have on-site consumption, Kevin Mark signed it, so that's in front of us now, so.
It's coming.
Do you want to deal with it here? Just go to work session?
To that point, there's, so some members, Peterson and Rivera, had reached out to us about working on some on-site consumption code provisions. Mandy Honest, Ryan Yell, and legal were all part of that. We were waiting to see if the new lieutenant governor signed it. Now that he did, we're gonna fire that back up.
Okay, so, what would be your preferred process?
But to work on it with that group and bring it through CEDC.
Do you want to bring it here or just go to work session?
I'll defer to both Senator Peterson and Rivera. It's their idea, but I like the idea of coming here before going.
Well, and I think Felix and I were just talking about edibles, because we figured that the actually smoking the product was going to be much more of a lengthy process. But we thought the edibles might be something we could add fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Whether it's marijuana or tobacco, they still have to conform to our state guidelines. What we have because we've actually had one tobacco place that went through that process, so you can do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to change the regulations just to allow marijuana to get around it.
No,
I want them to have to conform.
I believe the intent, as you heard some Peterson say, is to start with edibles.
I don't, we may start there, but pretty quick.
Yeah.
We need to be smoking, so I think that needs to be.
I think that Mr. Constant, and this is just offline conversation I had with him, so I don't want to put too many words in his mouth, but I think he is interested in doing a full-fledged on-site consumption ordinance, and I'm frankly interested in it too. I'm not gonna, I haven't taken the step of reaching out to folks to have it drafted yet, but when it comes, I'll be interested.
So I guess there's not a problem with splitting it up, but you wouldn't want to do anything that would preclude, or make it, if we get in where they can smoke,
Yeah.
Well, we were just thinking that, with the tourist season coming up, that we, you know, if edibles would, you know, wouldn't be a problem with the secondhand smoke situation.
But edibles are also
So-
not so much a problem because you can already eat them on the street, right? I mean, practically speaking, it's.
Who's chimed in here? So, I wasn't really anticipating
Vitamins, not marijuana.
talking about this, but we've already had a couple of licensees apply for floor plan changes so that they could include coffee carts in their retail establishment.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I kind of anticipate the reason for that is to incorporate marijuana products into the coffee.
Oh, really?
I mean,
the-
and who knows? I mean, it's
I'm
it's
for
not
people-
a stretch to think that they may already be doing
The
that.
shop that reached out to us portrayed it as, or at least to me, was portrayed as, we just want to sell coffee. People like coffee, and they're in my shop already.
Great, and maybe that's what they're doing,
Yeah.
but I also see that as a potential, next is down the road.
Leave it
So,
all in.
There is a manufacturer that is working on a peach creamer. So it is coming.
Okay.
Say a peach creamer? Oh, infused creamer.
Yes, so it is coming.
There you go.
And that's not, so within the industry, do you expect people, on-site consumption, are they thinking mostly edibles and infused creamer, or are they thinking a place to smoke?
No, they're thinking of a place to smoke.
Okay, so that, we need to deal with that. So if we dealt with edibles more quickly, because it doesn't trip over the smoking ordinance, and then right on its heels, or maybe simultaneously, smoking as well, is there an issue within the industry if we split those up?
Well, I don't think so. I just think I want it as soon as possible.
Gentlemen, thank you. Our second smoke ordinance was passed by the Assembly, but then it was protested by some people like Darwin. So it went to the voters, and the voters approved it. So the second-hand smoking was just not the Assembly, it was also the voters of Anchorage. So we've got to make sure that whatever we do doesn't conflict with that.
Sure. Thanks. Mandy?
Sorry.
So, Jed, obviously the state reg change is in compliance with the state non-smoking ban then, since it was signed off on?
Right, there's a carve-out in the state statute on the statewide non-smoking ban that allows for marijuana consumption.
So that's what we need to look at with
Well,
ours.
we don't have that card.
How did
I
that,
don't think so.
how did that end by the statute? No, I mean, was it passed by statute, or was it part of the yes on, or the ballot measure one, or two, or how
No,
did
it was
that
in
happen?
the statewide smoking ban that
Oh,
was
that was pretty
instituted
recent, actually.
last, yeah,
Right,
it
right,
went
right.
effective in September or October.
Right.
It's in that bill. I don't remember the, yeah.
Okay.
You might.
In the hopes that Forrest will get his wishy-washy end on time. So this is in play, and I think the question for you, do you want to come through here, go to work session, and if there's details, we can come here?
I think we could, you know, depending on how long it takes to write it up, I think we could probably have it to talk about it at our next meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
Since I'm running out of time, I'd like it to be at the next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Because I still may be able to that one.
Okay. Okay, so things are working, and we're bringing through here. And do you have the schedules at next meeting, or do you?
Now, I wouldn't, but, if you have, I mean, I can have something to discuss. we can
Well, it
just-
probably depends on how fast the team can draw it up or
A
something.
week or two, couple weeks. Do we have any licenses, man?
We don't have any coming up soon.
Okay, so we could look again at this handbook permit, which should be pretty quick. And then, and that'll be an interesting conversation. Okay.
Yeah, so it would be April 4th is our next meeting.
April 4? What do we, so we have a meeting, assembly meeting after that, and that, what do we do, is that a real meeting, or is that a sanction?
That's
of
the
election?
certification of the election.
And do we do anything else at that meeting? So that's just like, okay. So then the next real meeting for the assembly where we have the election stuff is.
The 23rd.
And that's April 23. So would we certify the election, then we swear people in on the 23?
So we normally do.
We organize. And then we'll be writing the first quarter budget revision, setting the mill rate, and we'll be extremely busy.
Well, this is complicated, though. We want new members to know what's going on with this site. This is a big issue. I think we'll hear about it. We saw it a year and a half ago, when it was just a thought.
Yeah.
So we're thinking our next meeting is gonna be in the 28th of March, or we're gonna go into April for the next meeting?
When we say next meeting of this committee, or?
The committee.
It We're thinking the 4th of April, aren't you? Yeah.
I don't want to rush it. I mean, if you're going to have
April 4th is
something.
fine.
April 4th?
is fine.
Okay, that's 3
Okay,
weeks.
so April 4th.
That'll be just gummies and things like edibles.
Well, if you have smoke,
We'll see. I mean, the intent is if we can tackle the on-site consumption of edibles first and simple, but let's do that. But certainly, we're going to be talking about all of the above.
okay. But April 4th, you'll focus on that. If you have more, you bring it. Okay. So notifying public, we'll have a handful of extra people that probably people opposed to smoking, but if we say edibles, that'll narrow
Yeah.
the discussion a little bit. Okay, so when you notice the meeting, do you have a list of people who, a year and a half ago we dealt with this, we had people from Spokane, Cambridge and so on.
I have that list, and I will make sure that I put them on it when you want them to be. Do you want them included on the edible one? Just as a heads up?
Just say, we're looking at edibles now, just to let you know smoking's down the line,
Okay.
be alert.
Well,
Within
and,
1,000 feet of it.
and an area we might be able to get a little information, I was reading online yesterday that some places in San Francisco actually have on-site consumption already. And so we might want to look and see what they've done for regulations and how it's been working.
Sure.
That's a good idea.
Are you doing that? Okay, anything else? All right, thanks.
We have audience participation.
Oh, I'm sorry, audience participation.
Where's Gene?
I'm not asking questions, he ain't here.
Okay. We have 1 minute.
Good interim report, just a couple of things to hand out.
Oh, cool.
And then on the location and the boundaries.
So I told them I could meet them
Thank you.
after, so if you want to talk after the meeting.
Sure, no, I'm happy to do that. If you wouldn't mind just passing these around. That's an email I sent to John earlier.
Oh, geez. Hey, it kind of looks like Alaska. It's like a flattened Alaska.
Hey, you're required to read mine. I'm sure. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, how are you?
Good.
Blue Fox is on the other side.
Okay, update.
Well, we've had 2 meetings, as I've reported in that note to you. The first one was with the Spenard and the Community Council of Spenard and Midtown. And then Tim and I met the other day for, I don't know, an hour and a half, and just talked about the issues, which are the boundaries and the product and the other things that are in that report. So we're going to go back to our people and get some additional stuff. And Tim did prepare a more generalized MOU that might work across these boundaries.
We're coordinating that with Jay Stang over at the Spenard Community Council because they've been working on that fairly hard as well. So the map that you have is from a link that Mandy sent me, which I really appreciate, and a proposed kind of draft boundary that's been discussed, and we'd like some direction on that. We originally started that it was going to be Midtown and Spenard, just because of the sheer concentration of packaged liquor licenses and other licenses, quite frankly. And there was increased interest in North Star, right on Fireweed Lane, is a ground juggle, that there are some additional issues with, that they've now started selling the cheap shooters. And we included Rogers Park so that we could also pull Fred Meyer in. Midtown would cover the proposed new Safeway and a lot of different outlets. And then Assemblyman Trainee had indicated an interest in extending out to a couple of more of his constituent areas along Tudor Road primarily, and across from the rescue mission and that. So if you extend out that community council boundary, it picks up an additional 3 licenses that are in packaged liquor stores that are in proximity to very high-speed traffic, terrible pedestrian improvements, and also kind of a history of people getting hit out in the middle of Tudor Road. So,
It'd be a university community council area.
Well, it actually would be Campbell Park Community Council and University Community Council, right along Tudor Road. We had people that buy in Campbell Park and walk across the street to try and get in the rescue mission that have been hit there before. Remember one photo, they showed the shoes in the street and the person was taken out by a car. So it's just a concern because you're gonna see more licenses come down this way.
So as we move forward with this, trying to identify a boundary, you could do it with either Spenard and Midtown and then touch the others by indicating anything that was directly abutting that or any of the major roads that were at the perimeter of those two. Or do we want to go more inclusive and actually have all of those? We have not included, you'll see in that one, university area. So we'd like some guidance, because it's either we do small, we do something that is reflective of the real concentration on problem areas, or we do the whole bowl.
Yep.
I would like to see University and Campbell Park added in there, Rogers Park added in there, because I see this expanding and I want to get ahead of the issue. And I would like to have overall geographic approach to this. Because we've got some liquor stores right down here, they're gonna say, hey, we want to be able to sell shooters, everything else is not fair. Put restrictions on us when something go somewhere else and buy them.
So we had a significant discussion about that topic, about the whack-a-mole version of new packaged liquor stores popping up, and I don't know that that's going to be as significant an issue as Jay Stang believes it is from Spenard, but because they still have to come through you to do that and go through the ABC board and go through the process. But I will be doing an overlay of that map and the city's zoning map so that you can see where there's corridors where that commercial property would be available for expansion of new facilities. So I think that will help guide us as to exactly where the boundary needs to be.
Yes, Pete, did you?
No, I'm good.
Forrest?
I'm good, thank you.
So your guidance, do you use the boundary or do you use if you're on that street? Is your question?
That's
I think
one
you
of the
have to
questions.
use if you're on that street, because otherwise you have one across the street from you.
Yeah, that's what led us into Rogers Park and led us down the road to Campbell Park and so on. We're trying to get those areas where things are like, where we've seen them. 99-cent shooters are now available at the Brown Jug on Lake Otis and Northern Lights. So what's going to happen is it's apparently a very popular product, as we all know, and if we leave some on the perimeter, all it's going to do is just shift the location. It's close enough. It's not going to change the practices. So we reached out further, and if you guys, the assembly wants us to, bring it back, I mean, reduce the boundaries, it's up to you. We're just trying to give you what we're afraid of and how we might be able to actually somehow effectively address the problem.
So is the issue 99-cent shooters? Because that sounds like an easy goal-wide thing.
That is a significant issue everywhere that they are sold.
What are the little, they're dark blue bottles. I pick those up when I'm picking up trash, but by far they are 10 times as many as any other little bottles.
Platinum double X
Isn't that
or
what you
something
like?
like that.
It is 99 cents.
I've picked up a bunch of them, and what's really interesting is that those seem to be starting to be very popular right now, just based on what you're picking up and what you see on the street.
Yeah, so is that a 99-cent one?
Most of those are sold as 99 centers, depending on which store you go to.
I got 10 yesterday. It's like they're just all over.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to put a deposit on 10 cents a bottle, that way people
Made $1.
And people pick
Yeah.
them up.
There you
Thought
go.
that too.
Oh,
Used to
it's
happen when I was a kid,
I know.
I'd get the beer bottles from my grandfather and take them to the store and drop them off.
Pop bottle used to be 3 cents, used to run around and pick those up.
Okay.
So what do we do with this? We have, talking about area restrictions, we have this growing boundary. If you talk to more community councils, it will grow, right? So we really have it, either you shrink it up, or we do bowl wide, or what, I mean, we just continue to move, right?
My view, if you're asking me, is that we're trying to encompass what's in this area. Downtown has one liquor store left, and it's not a problem. So this is the problem area. They are not experiencing this. I don't think you'll find it, say south of not Tudor, maybe the next one down, Dowling or something. It doesn't seem to exist in those areas. Now that doesn't mean it can't move, but I would rather not be over-expansive, because you can always expand more. But let's see what happens in this area. So let's do something like
it
this
has to
and
be
see
a
how it goes.
justifiable boundary, and it seems to be the concentration, types of roads, lack of pedestrian facilities, where we actually have kind of a history of, people getting hurt and illicit activity occurring.
I was just gonna ask, Sarah Oates gave a really, I think, good suggestion of making it a requirement, or whatever is decided a requirement muni-wide, but allowing for some sort of endorsement for exemptions. How she said if they supply a robust security plan or something to that effect. Is that something that you guys have thought about any further?
No, but we're gonna meet with her next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we had two with the community councils and ourselves, and now we told her that we would get in touch with her for this next meeting, which we'll do now. And then, we have some time, obviously. The only unfortunate thing from my perspective is that if we go into April, then we'll miss Mr. Trainee, who's been very active in this stuff. But you can come as a citizen and tell your former city
Me and
mayor,
Eugene,
council
right?
members.
Me and Eugene?
Yeah, we'll hold hands.
There you go.
You'll get 3 minutes.
Huh?
You'll get 3 minutes.
I'll figure out how to get more.
Yeah, you'd be the president of the community council.
Okay, so you have an update. Do you
My
want to
wife
go
is.
talk to Sarah? You want to go talk to Sarah and some others and then bring
Oh,
us back?
sure, we're not done. We're working, like we said, probably April, maybe May before it's all done, and we've gone to all the community councils. We haven't been to North Star or Campbell Park or Rogers Park yet, but we will.
Call Sandy, she's president of Campbell Park again. She'll say you have to come and talk to her.
I knew that. I thought you'd just tell her what she needs to know.
I don't tell her a thing.
You should try to schedule those meetings for May, because some of those community councils may not meet again until September, so.
Actually,
Well,
mine do.
Yeah, but we'll know who the presidents are, and we can reach out to them, and maybe they have a special meeting. I don't think the major ones downtown take the summer off, but we're gonna reach out to them in this month and next, both, so.
Well, like Campbell Park does not take the summer off. University has an e-board that meets in the summertime. I've been trying to get them to meet year-round, because the city's gotten too big to just take the summer off. There's
Personally, I
issues
love
causing
having the summer break at community councils.
Well, you just say you take off. I think community councils need to meet when the work needs to be done, but that's.
Yeah, the executive board can.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.